Happy Monday and welcome into Crossing Broadcast. We have so much to get into today. Finally, we have been freed from the shackles of a baseball-only city and union, if you consider that a sport. I do, but many of you don't. Welcome into a show. The Philadelphia Eagles, they won their first game. You know that because you're an intelligent human being, and it also happened a few days ago. But you came to your number one news source. God help you if that's true. Crossing Broadcast on a Monday. I'm Russ Joy. You know that. You can find me here. You can find me every Tuesday and Friday over on the Russ Joy Show, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. You can find Snow The Goalie, which will have a thing. We'll have an episode this week. I will lock it in. It is happening this week. And we apparently are trying to finalize a nice big old round table interview thing for later this week, also for Snow The Goalie. So a big week. I might even bring back It's Just Wrestling. That's how crazy I feel this week. Week one of the NFL season is effectively over. One of the roughest weeks with what we do, me and Big Bet Bob and our team, what we have to do, and Craigles and all the people who have to do. Week one is just insane, but we did get to enjoy the Eagles at least a little bit. Now, in fairness, we didn't all enjoy the Eagles game early, but we will talk about that. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on your team, your town, your Philadelphia Eagles. Are you sold? Are you worried? Are you a mix of both? You come here for the Eagles talk. You stay for the Schadenfreude. We are going to be talking about the Giants fans, and how they're feeling, booing Daniel Jones as he leaves the stadium in a way that I would say is not very safe. Not a very safe or secure way for players to leave the stadium. We'll get to that a little bit later on. And we might even get to something else crazy that happened. Carter Hart apparently is trying to get back into the United States. That just broke this morning. That's right, redacted. Carter Hart is apparently trying to get back into the United States because apparently there are no fucking gyms or hockey players to train with in Canada. He feels like he has to come to the U.S. But don't worry, if you live in the tri-state area, it doesn't sound like he's coming to you. It sounds like he's trying to go to Tennessee. We might come back to that later in the show, and if not, I'm sure I'll detail that on Tuesday's Russ Joy Show and also on Snow The Goalie. But I want to thank Craig in advance, who's on the other side of the glass with that $450,000 salary, which might even go up after his performance this week. Just doing some great images for commercial content here at the XL Media umbrella. That's a big thank you to Craig. He's drinking some water on the other side. He's got a beautiful flannel on. He's ready to go. And I'm ready to have a little chat with all of you. I want to join there. Thank everybody who's joining on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter/X. And those of you, and you know who you are because I can see you on a different window here in the screen. Those of you who are checking in on Instagram Live, I see you. I see you, Instagram Live people. Now, if you comment, I can't pull your comment up on the screen, but I will certainly pull it up and I'll have a little chat and we'll read it off on the show. So you get to kind of participate, but it's not fully participating. But Instagram Live people, we love you too. Now, let's go over to some of the comments before we dive into the Eagles and we dive into what is that exactly it was that we saw. Happy moments, concerning moments, but overall, a pretty damn good performance, all things considered. Before we get into the Eagles, let's have a little chitty chat with some of the people who decided to check in live. I saw that Craig has been popping some of these up. He's been dropping some of the comments. We got some people calling out that the show was late. That was Craig and I having a little bit of show prep just very quickly. Craig was like, hey, your audio and your video are lined up for the first time ever. And then within about 45 seconds, he's like, there's a delay. Now, Craig complains about it. I don't see a lot of people in the comments of these videos who come back and say that it's a problem. So either everybody's wrong or Craig is wrong or people just don't care. They're just so thrilled to have this kind of level of exceptional insight and entertainment on a marvelous Monday. We'll find out pretty soon. Now, Danny Small, I'm going to give a ton of credit to. We love Danny. Danny's part of our team here. He doesn't write for Crossing Broad, but he writes for the parent company. Writes stuff everywhere. You have to read about legal online sports betting. Chances are you've read some of what Danny's had to write. Now, Danny had the audacity after the first play, after the first handoff to Saquon Barkley, where he slipped on the turf. And it's being very generous to say the turf. I don't exactly know what the Eagles and Packers were playing on in Sao Paulo, Brazil, but I will tell you that it was not great. Anyway, Saquon falls behind the line, and Danny Small has the audacity to tweet, "Is Saquon cooked?" And he just checked in here over on YouTube. I will admit that I had some fun trolling Danny after not one touchdown, not after two touchdowns. We're not going to go all the way to the five-time WCW champion Booker T. We'll just stop at 3. Saquon Barkley, a 3-touchdown performance, some would argue, is legitimately the reason that the Eagles walked away with the win. And if you feel like that, by all means, again, you can let me know in the comments. Saquon was massive, which we'll talk about here in a second, but I am going to give Danny all the credit in the world for going out of his way and dropping it back here. Now, was the Sodfather on hand for this game in Brazil? It was not great. Like we can have a whole moment where we're like, you listen on the telecast and they say, well, what the players are experiencing tonight is they are on this turf, this field in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And it is a combination of grass, but there are also turf fibers. There are turf strands that are also kind of interwoven into the surface to allow for better traction. It didn't work. I mean, if they added turf to that field with the thought that like this will help the 350-pound men, I don't know why this is the accent, the 350-pound men stick into the ground and push, it didn't work. It didn't help. And it's funny because it feels like every time there's like a conversation about going abroad, and Craig's bringing this up. Craig, hit that little full screen button on the Jim Jam right there so we can get a little bit of a better look. But this is what the turf looked like at the end of that game. Pretty unrecognizable. Now, if you were like me, we'll have a moment here. If you played soccer or football growing up and you had to share the same field. Now we're going to hop back in the Wayback Machine. All right. We're going to go up to Schuylkill County. We're going to go up to the coal region where Pottsville High School's soccer team played Alumni Field. Beautiful place. Beautiful grass. Everything is great, except they would allow for midget football. Don't get triggered, Craig. Midget football is an acceptable term. They weren't little people playing. They were little people, but they weren't like forever little people. They were little people because they're children. The midget football teams, when they would start their season, they would tear the shit out of that field. And so for like a month and a half of the soccer off season into games, Alumni Field was pristine, immaculate, remarkable. But once the midget football teams would end up out there, they would tear it to hell and it would almost never recover. You'd have these weird divots in certain spots. You'd have areas that you'd probably like roll your ankle. Thankfully, we weren't, playing in very questionable places where, people would drop stuff. But like I've seen some bad fields that kind of look like it. Anyway, the Sao Paulo stadium turf looked horrific by the end. Horrific. Like everything was dug up. Now, there was the initial comment, right? They always kind of do a level setting with these national telecasts when it's a game that happens abroad. Typically, it's the London game. Maybe it's the game in Munich or Frankfurt. They're going to Munich this year. Last year in Frankfurt. It's always this discussion of like, hey, the grass, the turf and everything. It's not going to be ideal. These are soccer fields. They are meant to be played on by comparatively smaller people, fast. It's a different style, different types of grass. It's not meant to be dug up by big burly linemen. It's probably not meant to be cut on in the way that Saquon Barkley and his 600-pound squatting thighs are able to generate push. It's not meant for that. So every time the NFL goes abroad and they try to play at a soccer stadium, this happens. The thing that's kind of befuddling to me is that, like, at this point, it seems like no equipment manager has been able to figure out what is it that would work the best. And we all know this, right? Like, we know that when the Eagles lost in the Super Bowl to Kansas City, they had this fantastic defensive line. They had this fantastic ability of Hassan Reddick, for example, to just get to the quarterback. It was all kind of negated just because of the field, because of the sod, because of the mix, all that. And the Eagles struggled. And I think it's pretty safe to say, just based on the lack of impact that the Eagles defense had in that Super Bowl, stands to reason that, like, they were more adversely impacted by the quality of the field and the way that it was set up. And it was kudos to the Chiefs in a sense that they had figured it out. They'd figured out with their cleats or whatever, that they could make better use of their equipment on that field and get better leverage and get better grip. This was not the case for Eagles-Packers. No one seemed to have any idea of what they were going to do. And the telecast began by saying, Eagles players have tried out 2 or 3 different types of cleats. They're trying to figure it out. They're not exactly sure what they're going to go with. Saquon Barkley falls. Danny Small asks, is Saquon cooked? And then you fast forward a little bit. Some of the guys changed their cleats. They changed the way that they were going about things. And then you started to see the Eagles begin to settle in. I don't know at what point the NFL is going to have to like step in. If you're going to have one of these neutral site games, if you're going to play in a soccer stadium, you almost have to, you can't mandate it, but you almost have to figure out a way to get a better playing surface that is more advantageous and more dedicated to like what a football team needs than like going and ripping up the soccer field. Because in fairness, the players in Sao Paulo now are going to go back onto that and it's all ripped up. The grounds crew is going to have to work double, triple overtime just to try to get the field back to some respectable playing shape. It's not great. Not great. And it leads to a subpar product just in general for football fans to have to watch. Nobody likes the idea of taking a highly skilled player like Saquon Barkley and watching him slip and slide everywhere. Nobody likes watching the very end of that game with like 10 seconds or so to go. Jalen Carter makes a play. Jordan Love's knee pops. You could see that he kind of slipped going into it. In a sense, the Eagles and Packers are very lucky that there weren't any more significant injuries. And Craig, I see that you have something ready to go there. Hurts changed into Air Jordan 11 cleats at the Eagles game. So he decided that he was going to switch up his equipment. He didn't seem to have near the same kind of slipping issues that some of the other players on the field had. That's just part of being a pro. Jalen Hurts, tip of the cap. Now, I bring up this thing. I said that, the Eagles and Packers are lucky that there weren't any more significant injuries. I mean, in fairness, the Packers had the most significant injury they could have had, right? Jordan Love is their most important player. He's very fortunate not to have ruptured his ACL or torn it, that he ended up with a sprain or strain of his MCL. He's still going to miss a lot of time. It doesn't kill their chances of being a top 2, top 3 team in the NFC. It maybe puts them in a little bit of tenuous footing as it pertains to the NFC North. They're obviously not thrilled. And if he's in there for the last couple of plays, if he's able to get some chunk yardage, if he's the one launching the Hail Mary at the end of the game, do we think that Zach Bond gets to make the tackle at the very end? Or do we think that it probably ends with a ball somewhere near the end zone? And like, given the way that players had been slipping around early in the game, is it possible that a defensive back falls down, a receiver comes up with that, and it's a miraculous win for the Packers? It's entirely possible. That's why they play the game. But it's still not ideal. And if you're the NFL, you have to figure it out. Now, I will point out, and then we'll get back into the Eagles here, the games abroad are not done yet. There is another one to come. And I feel really bad for the people in Germany. And I saw a meme going around on Twitter a couple days ago, or it was yesterday. And it said, like, the final thing that Germany has to atone for World War II, their final thing that they had to like meet as part of the peace treaty, is they have to deal with the Carolina Panthers versus the New York Giants as their game this year. There's bad football, and then there's whatever the hell the Panthers and Giants are going to put out for the German public. I cannot fathom. I mean, I know that the game's going to sell because the Germans enjoy football. Europeans enjoy football. They're not football, but football. They enjoy it enough that they're going to make the travel to go see it. But you couldn't have put a much worse matchup on the road. And we'll get back to the Giants in a second, but let's talk about the guy who ultimately did play the most meaningful role, at least on the offensive side of the ball for the Eagles. And that was Saquon Barkley. As I mentioned before, he didn't have the greatest start, slipping a few yards behind the line of scrimmage. Not ideal. He then goes on to just take over the game. The speed. Now, I don't know how you guys felt. I knew within reason what to expect from Saquon Barkley, but I didn't expect to see the same kind of explosiveness that we saw from him against the Packers, where you see Cam Jurgens kind of go out, take care of the defensive tackle, then go back to his assignment. It cleared enough of a hole. Saquon just goes sprinting up the middle for a massive gain. And at one point, same kind of play, ends up in the end zone. I was shocked. It looked like Saquon from Penn State. It looked like Saquon from like his rookie or second year. This doesn't look like a guy who the Giants spent time slandering a year ago and then spent slandering going into this offseason in closed quarters in rooms that also happen to have a camera because of Hard Knocks, where they were saying, like, how do you pay a guy $10 million a year to be a running back at his age? How do you justify it? Never mind the fact that the Giants decided that they were going to pay an absurd amount of money to Daniel Jones, who absolutely stinks. They made that calculation, but they didn't think that having their most marketable player, their most popular player, their overall best player re-signed to their team mattered. Saquon Barkley goes out and does exactly what I think a lot of us did expect, which was he's going to take advantage of when there's a hole that opens up. He doesn't misread plays from the backfield. If you create a hole for him, he's going to go through. And I think we actually saw another element to Saquon that maybe takes him above what DeAndre Swift was able to do a year ago, what you would even say in prior years, some of the backs were kind of unable to do or weren't as much of a threat to do. We saw the touchdown, the wheel route that goes to the left corner of the end zone where Jalen Hurts floats a beautiful ball into double coverage. Saquon goes up, gets it, brings it down, both feet in bounds. Actually had like the 3-foot touch coming down. But that was like another level to his game. That was another thing that whether you expected that element of Saquon Barkley or not, I didn't go into it saying, oh, let's see how Saquon is as a receiver out of the backfield. I didn't expect it. And yet I was pleasantly surprised. Now, did Saquon have the greatest game of his life? I don't know. You could make a case that that performance for the Eagles is one of the best offensive debuts for a new team in the last 2 decades in the NFL. Maybe you could say it goes back even further. I mean, I think in his Giants career, he had 5 games with 3 or more touchdowns. And here he is in game 1 as an Eagle, has 3 of his own. Now, I know what people are thinking, right? And there are probably Giants fans where if they were joining us today, other than Danny, they'd say, yeah, but Russ, like, doesn't stay healthy. Like, that's part of it. Like, yes, he'll have a great game. He'll have a game that he takes over, but then he's going to get hurt. And then what? And to that, I simply say, you might be right. And like, there is a total possibility that Saquon at some point gets hurt and misses a few games. But what you've now seen is at least a good omen for what could come down the line. When you're getting into the postseason, which this team looks very much poised to, if you get into the postseason that you have an every down back who can be a legitimate threat in a multitude of different ways. And let's have a very brief moment. We'll just have a very brief moment here that we can talk about the fact that the offense looked different just in general than Brian Johnson's offense. Now, you don't come here for the X's and O's breakdown of yours truly, but there was a ton of pre-snap motion, which you can see a defense has to adjust to. It's kind of wild. If you think back to a year ago with Brian Johnson's offense, everything was stagnant. There was practically nothing happening before the snap. There's nothing to like add a potential wrinkle or to make a defense treat a formation any differently. There's no need to communicate with the rest of your teammates about where the hell is that guy going, who's got him, who's on him. There's none of that. A year ago, this time, you have all this pre-snap motion, and all of a sudden, the Eagles' offense looked significantly more dynamic. Then you can have questions and concerns about Jalen Hurts' first interception into double coverage, a couple of throws that went into triple coverage that could have also been picked. And you can have that question about whether or not he was reading the defense appropriately. You can go back to some of the concerns you might have had during the epic collapse at the end of last year and think that that is going to signal all of the problems that could be coming for the Eagles. And if Jalen Hurts isn't able to adjust or to adapt to what the defense is showing him, that it could be a problem going down the line. I will simply counter with this. And I know a lot of this is just coming back to Saquon, but like Jalen Hurts has not had a back like Saquon before. DeAndre Swift was a very good running back. He was a solid performer. And listen, Swift might have benefited because of the wideouts, because of A.J. Brown, because of Devontae Smith, and because of the gravity they both have and the attention that they're going to both have, and knowing that Dallas Goedert's running routes underneath and that he's a legitimate potential playmaker, right? Maybe not a game breaker, but definitely a playmaker that you have to adjust for and you have to account for if you're a defense. Maybe DeAndre Swift benefited from that, but it's kind of hard to imagine that there were defenses last year that said, oh, we have to game plan around DeAndre Swift. We have to limit him. No, it was more of how do we stop the passing game? And that'll allow us to shut down the running game. With Saquon in the backfield, that whole thing changes. Like now you already had defensive coordinators kind of pulling their hair out, figuring how do we negate the two wideouts, how do we minimize the impact that Goddard could have underneath? Oh, and by the way, like Dotson didn't even really play much of a factor in this game, but you know that he has the ability to beat you deep. There's that. But now it's also, oh shit, there's a legitimate 3-down back who has the explosiveness of a second-year player and can also, pretty much squat a Mini Cooper. Oh, we have to deal with that now. Now, if you were also concerned about the tush push, we got to see that the tush push works. Now, maybe it doesn't work the same way. Maybe it's not going to be the 93% conversion play that it was a year ago. But as a whole, Cam Jurgens stepping in for future Hall of Famer Jason Kelce did an admirable job. And we saw him throughout the course of the game create those holes for Saquon Barkley. I'd love to show them to you. I'd love to break them down on film here. We cannot, or YouTube will flag the whole thing, so it's not worth it. But go back. I'm sure that there have been some compilations put together of some great blocks that Jurgens set that allowed for the back to actually succeed. But on the tush push itself, you could see he was getting leverage. You could see the benefit. And this is like another one of those. I feel like everything does come back to Saquon, which you have to be careful, right? You can't have it all be about one guy. But there was the second attempt at the tush push where it's like you have Jalen Hurts who can squat 500, and then you have Saquon Barkley who can squat 600 pushing behind him. And mind you, they didn't have great traction with their cleats. Imagine what that's going to look like on actual football turf. Imagine what actually having legitimate leverage is going to look like with those two, and you're trying to execute the tush push. It could be a really exciting thing here for the Eagles fans. It could be a really great start of the year. Now, I will go back to Jalen Hurts here for a second. Some not great turnovers early in the game. Some maybe bad reads. I said this last week on the Russ Joy Show on a Tuesday. You have to be really careful how much stock you put into the Eagles and Packers game. Because if the Eagles looked horrific, you could very easily point back to they didn't play in the preseason. I tweeted this too. Early in the game, it was timing issues. It was a snap issue where Cam Jurgens throws the ball, right? He snaps the ball back to Hurts, who's not expecting it, leads to a turnover, not a great play. And you say, hey, at the start of this game, this looks like an offense that didn't get any reps in preseason. This looks like a team that didn't get any actual live rounds fired their way because they didn't play any preseason snaps. And this was actually a conversation that was had on the post-game show where Barrett Brooks and Ron Jaworski were like, yeah, it's significantly more beneficial to get preseason snaps. And Reuben Frank, who has not played at that level, is like, no, it's fine. They played preseason games before. The beginning of this game to me looked like rust. There were also questions going into last week's game about the travel. How much impact is it going to be? Is the travel going to be or have going into the Southern Hemisphere? It's not an easy flight. We knew that these guys were going to have a bit of a commute to the stadium. Not as bad for the Eagles as it was for the Packers, who had about a 2.5 hour commute from their hotel to the stadium. But you knew the Eagles were going to get in on Wednesday. They were going to practice Thursday, and then they're playing a game Friday. There's not really a lot of time to get acclimated. Jet lag could have been a factor, all that. And I said last week, you have to be really careful because if the Eagles don't look good, it could be a lot of things, right? It could be the rustiness from not playing in the preseason. It could be jet lag. It could be the travel implications. It could honestly be the way that some of these guys were talking about it last week and going into it. Could be the stress of being in this other country where you've been given this long list of things you can and cannot do. Anything that throws you off your rhythm could potentially have an adverse effect on your ability to perform at your peak level. So you take all those things into consideration. I was like, all right, I mean, if the Eagles look bad, it could be a combination of those things. They can't look like total dog shit, but if they look kind of bad, you could say, all right, like maybe there are some positives to take away. And I said, conversely, if the Eagles looked amazing, right? If they blew the socks off of the Packers last week, you'd say, hey, maybe it's something where the Packers felt the impact of the travel more and that longer commute to the stadium more. So it was like, you can't look at week one and say, this is 100% going to tell you what the first 6 or 8 games of the season are going to look like for the Eagles or for the Packers for that matter. And where I came away from on Friday was it was an ugly game. The field wasn't in the best shape. Hurts made some weird reads. I felt oddly comforted in large stretches of the game by the impact that the defense had. Zach Bond had a hell of a game. Nakobe Dean had some big plays. You saw the defensive line causing some actual havoc. And like last year, right? We all knew that last year, the linebackers were an issue, right? We all know that Howie Roseman doesn't really address the linebacking position. We all know that. Something about what we saw on Friday gave me just a smidge of hope that, like, all right, Nakobe Dean hasn't been able to be healthy. There have been concerns about, if he's undersized. He looked like an impact player, not a game-breaking player, but an impact player, an actual starter in this league. Zach Bond, I have no idea what he's going to look like the rest of the season, right? He might legitimately look like dog shit in 3 weeks. He might look like a mid player at best 12 weeks into the season. But if you're going to get the kind of level of play from him at that position this entire season, or for much of it, you're in significantly better shape. Jalen Carter looked fantastic. Jordan Davis looked impactful. There are positives to take away from this. Now, there was a play, and CJGJ went post-game. He was in the locker room. He was calling some people out, calling some fans out, because he missed an open field tackle. And he kind of said, imagine somebody running downhill, car running downhill, and you're trying to stop it. There are only so many ways you could stop it. It's not as easy as you think it is. There were a couple of misreads in the secondary. But overall, you have to feel pretty good about Quinyon Mitchell. You have to feel pretty good about the return of CJGJ. There are some positives I took away from the defensive side of the ball. And if you've been following along here on Crossing Broadcast on Mondays and on the Russ Joy Show on Tuesdays and Fridays, I say that just for Craig. If you have been following along, you'll know that I mostly kind of sat back and said the offense is fine. We know that the offense is going to be fine, minus not actually seeing Cam Jurgens take the place of Jason Kelce. You figure that line is going to be strong. We know that the running back was going to be very good. The receivers are fantastic. The tight end is very reliable. The quarterback, you have to hope, looks more like MVP runner-up than the end of last year. But I had significant questions about the defense. And when Nick Wright did the whole thing about how the Eagles are the third best team in the NFC East, I said, he might not be wrong, but his rationale for getting there really omitted the defensive side of the ball where I thought there were significant holes and concerns. Now, I will point out, this defense is not the deepest group. So if that's what you're going to get from those guys, that's fine. You start racking up some injuries, especially at linebacker. I don't think they have the horses. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that if there is an injury at some point, and typically it is football, there will be injuries. Hopefully someone else will be ready to step up. But I was very encouraged. Let's go out to the questions, comments, and concerns. I'm going to start actually over on Instagram Live because I said I can't pull their comments up on the screen, but I can still shout them out when I see them. And there was one that just came in that was actually a very, very good point. Here it is. Steve Farrell Show says our preseason was the first quarter. And I think that Steve might be right. I think that could be a big part of what you saw. So much of why this Eagles team didn't look comfortable, didn't look locked in, didn't look crisp is just because they hadn't played. And that really was their first time as a team on both sides of the ball, plus special teams, to kind of figure it out. I think Steve might have some validity to his argument. Let's go over to YouTube and Facebook and the rest really quick. And Craig, I know you were pulling some stuff up, but this is over here and I don't always see them, but Josh White says that was without Devin White too. It's interesting because I know that the Eagles reporters were having the issue, right? They couldn't tweet. So they were sending the text to go into a tweet to their wives and girlfriends and families back in the States, who then had to go and tweet it out on their behalf. But there was this thing that came out last week that Devin White wasn't going to make the trip with the team, but that he apparently also wasn't going to be starting anyway. And that Dean and Bond looked really good. And so there wasn't a ton of concern. I don't actually know what to expect from Devin White. Again, we can be very happy here that Bond and Dean looked as good as they did. D.D. Skinner says, Bond, I don't know what happened here. This looks like an autocorrect, but Bond, a nice surprise to look forward to. Oh, there he goes. He fixed it. So that he was excited for Bond. Ford checks in. Jalen made two absolute boneheaded decisions that could have cost the team the win. I will point out just really briefly, there were a number of passes that could have flipped this game on its head. There were also some dropped interceptions by the Eagles, and one that actually did lead to a scoring drive continuing for the Packers. So there were some mistakes made on both sides of the ball, but the game worked out. Didi says that Hurts makes him nervous. Ford commenting on my coffee. Yeah, by the way, I've had no coffee today. The energy right now is just au natural. So excited to do the crossing broadcast on the Monday. And I'm really just more excited to get into like the Giant Schadenfreude here in a second. Sean C says, Hurts was by far the worst part of the game. Les Bowen had it right. The more time he had, the dumber he became. Hopefully he can clean that up. Sometimes there's something to be said for a guy being given too much time and that he might not go through his reads appropriately. He could still miss something. Like there was a play, I think it was the Cardinals game, right? Marvin Harrison was wide open, ran into the end zone. Nothing. Kyler Murray didn't even look his way. Especially for a quarterback that has the legs that Jalen Hurts has and has the ability to go at a defense in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes they miss reads. It's not like, here's your really bad comparison for the day. Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, right? Not particularly mobile. Didn't really rely on their legs. In the case of Brady, like could get places if need be. Peyton really was not that guy. They're going through the reads in a totally different way because they, in the back of their minds, know that using their legs to go pick up 10 or 15 yards isn't really on the table. In the case of a Jalen Hurts, a Kyler Murray, a Lamar Jackson, to some extent, a Josh Allen, those guys know that they have the wheels that they could pick up the first down. And so sometimes they make what we consider to be mistakes because they immediately go to their legs instead of maybe going through the progressions one more time, or sometimes being guilty of getting locked onto one receiver and trying to wait for that to come open. There were some iffy moments. We'll have to see. Like we're gonna see here over the next few games. Was this a situation where Hurts looked rusty? Is it because of the lack of good footing? We'll find out soon. Sean C also points out Hurts ended up throwing a screen. AJ Brown ended up breaking up an interception. I think that's it. Here we go. CT Landry over on X says, Hurts is still a young quarterback. I have the faith he can clean this stuff up. Let's end the conversation on a little bit of positivity. There we go. CT, well done. Well done to you. A little bit of positivity on a Monday morning, Monday afternoon. Depends on where you're watching. Might be Monday afternoon if you're over in the UK or somewhere in Europe. It could be Monday evening if you're somewhere in the Middle East or heading over to the Asian countries. Perhaps you're watching right now in Moscow. What's the time in Moscow, Craig? What's the Moscow time? I'm actually going to look it up. My guess is Moscow like 11 hours ahead. Does that sound right? Let's see. Right now in Moscow, it's 7:35. So they're 7 hours ahead. I'm very wrong. I am wildly off. Where's 11 hours ahead? What's Australia? How far ahead? What time is it in Sydney? Australia is massive, by the way. And so they have a bunch of time zones. It's 2:36. So they're, 14 hours ahead. Somebody split the difference for me. Let me know where it's 11 hours different. All right, anyway. The Eagles felt good. A big part of it was Saquon Barkley. You know who wasn't feeling good? The Giants. Now, I'm going to actually resurface something that people probably forgot about. And it's a clip from a year ago. Craig, I have it sent over to you. There was a clip from last year. Now, if you remember, Saquon Barkley wanted a new contract last year. The Giants didn't want to give him a new contract. There were rumors last year, 2023, that Barkley might hold out, that he might not show up to camp. And a big part of that was, does he have it in him to really stick it to this organization where he spent his entire career? Does he feel like he has to do that to prove his worth? Because at that point, the Giants didn't seem to value him in the same way. Craig, hit that full screen button and then bring it up. Because this I think gives you a little bit of insight into where Saquon Barkley's head was a year ago. And you have to imagine that this was also going through his head now that he's a member of the Eagles and knowing that he was going to play before the Giants this week. And there's something to prove to your former team. All right, go ahead, play it.
I could say fuck you to the Giants. I could say fuck you to my teammates and be like, you want me to show you my worth? You want to show you how valuable I am to the team? I won't show up. I won't play it down. And that's a play I can use. Anybody knows me, knows that's not something I want to do. But like it's something that crossed my mind. It's like I never thought I would ever do that. But like now I'm at a point where it's like, Jesus, like I might have to take it to this level? And like, am I willing? Am I prepared to take it to the level? I don't know. That's something I got to sit down and like, I got to talk to my family. I got to sit down, talk to my team. Got to really, strategize about this. Can't just like go off of emotions. Cause like I sit here and say like, oh, be mature. This, I could say, fuck you to the Giants.
We'll
I
take
say,
that
fuck
down.
you to my.
Although he could say fuck you to the Giants, and he kind of did in a way. So you go back to where he was a year ago, right? Not exactly the best headspace with the team that he had been with for his entire career. And now ultimately he was a guy who valued team and thought that it was sending a wrong message, right? To potentially hold out. Went into that interview saying as much. You go back into this past offseason and you go back to the clips of John Mara, the owner of the Giants, saying, I really don't want to lose him. But then listening to their head of football ops and some of their scouts and some of the other front office personnel, essentially saying like he's not of the age that you want to pay 10 million plus. And that also running backs are kind of a commodity. They're not that hard to replace. They're not the kind of elite playmakers that you need at quarterback or receiver. They think that a running back could be replaceable. Again, we're not going to put the Giants here on total blast. We're not going to have a whole thing like where we break down the Giants' belief in their offseason plan. It was clearly wrong. Now, again, injuries could be a thing that could like throw this whole thing in flux, right? But like the Giants look bad because of what Barkley did, right? On Friday, the Giants looked genuinely stupid, okay? Now, we can be fair and say that the Eagles have a better line than the Giants do. That was part of the Giants' reasoning for not bringing back Barkley, or not extending him a legitimate offer, was that they realized they needed to upgrade their line. They paid significant money for Daniel Jones, which was a mistake, but they decided to do that, and they said, in order to maximize that, we have to improve the line. Fine. So we knew the Eagles had a better line. Barkley was probably going to benefit from that without anything changing, playing behind a better line and a quarterback that really is more respected by defensive coordinators than Daniel Jones. He was going to have a good game. I don't think anybody expected him to have a 3-touchdown game. And like I said before, I didn't expect the ability in the passing game for him to bring down the touchdown that he did through the air. They looked bad. The Giants looked bad on Friday. The Giants looked significantly worse after Sunday. Because, I don't know if you knew this or not, Saquon Barkley had 3 touchdowns. The New York Giants, not so much. The Giants, 0 touchdowns. So,
you might not be so good at math. All right, so we're gonna make sure that we go back over this, all right? We're gonna do the counting fingers today. You ready? So Saquon, he goes out, he scores 1 touchdown. 1 is greater than 0. He goes out, he scores 2 touchdowns. 2 is greater than 0. He goes out and scores a third. The audacity to score a 3rd touchdown. The Giants, 0. This obviously did not go over well with Giants fans. There are videos going around of Giants fans leaving the stadium in the beginning or the middle of the 3rd quarter. Now, just for context, right? MetLife Stadium makes me sick. I don't like that place at all. They have a nice press box. But like other than that, MetLife Stadium's not great. To me, it kind of looks like a prison. It's just like a concrete prison. Giants fans pay a lot of money for those tickets, just like Eagles fans pay a lot of money for Eagles tickets, right? Imagine the amount of money you have to throw down to go to that Giants game, the absurd parking rate, and the absurd, if not inconceivable amount of money you have to spend on concessions. They left in the 3rd quarter because of how poor their performance was. We're not even going to get into the jerseys that the Giants wore, which kind of looked like the Montreal Canadiens, like had some kind of influence on the New York Giants. They were bad. It was not a good look for the Giants. Daniel Jones throws a pick 6 at the end of the game. He had more pick 6s than touchdowns through the air. Insanity. It got worse, though, because Daniel Jones was leaving the stadium. I think I sent this to you, Craig. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. And if I didn't, I'll pull it up here. I did not send it to you. There's a video going around. So, you know how, like, if you're at the Eagles game, or you're at, like, say a Flyers game, right? Flyers and Sixers, they come out from Wells Fargo Center. There's like a little tunnel that their cars come up out of, right? Like that one time Tortorella almost hit me. It was totally fine. No big deal. should have let Torts hit me. It would have been funny for Snow The Goalie. But anyway, where those guys come out is one thing. The Eagles have a different setup. But Craig, pull this video up. So the Giants got run out of their own stadium, right? The Giants have this thing outside of MetLife where there's this one metal guardrail. Now, I don't know what's on the right side of this video, but play it, Craig. Daniel Jones is coming out of the stadium to go to his car. And Giants fans, no, I want you to unmute it, Craig. I want people to hear the vitriol.
I need $1 million, Daniel. I need $1 million, Danny. I need $1 million. Give me a. Stop.
Now, the reason that I wanted the audio on that, Craig, is because the fans booed with the same kind of energy that the Giants played with. Boo. Boo. Then there was a boo, kind of like a dying cow. But it was also boo. That's what you get. Now, I can't fathom why you would let any of your athletes walk with that limited security. There's no security guards lined up along that barrier, right? That's like a typical metal barrier that you'd see at like an indie show, pro wrestling show at like the Armory or the VFW. That's supposed to keep the fans back. So they boo this guy. Their $40 million man, they boo him. Insane. Now, if this were the Eagles, it's very different. The Eagles would not do this. They would not allow for their players to be that open to the fans after a loss. Not exactly great. Now, I did see that over in the comments, Joey B was saying, there it is. Joey B says, my Giants are a shit show, period. We'll have a top 5 draft pick. Shedeur Sanders to the Giants would be even more of a shit show if that occurs. Sanders to the Raiders makes the most sense, feeds that narrative in Vegas. Good God. I feel really, really bad. I feel bad for Joey. I feel a little bit bad for Giants fans. They chose Daniel Jones over Saquon Barkley. Now, there were some other really good memes that came out over the weekend. There were some more things that hit Twitter. And Craig, go to the video of the jersey because this one resonates. This is one of those things that you see it and you can't help but laugh at Giants fans. The Giants fans decided that they were going to burn a Saquon Barkley jersey. This was last week. I believe this was actually before the Eagles and Packers played. And it's funny because the tweet is by Thomas Cassell, who's in charge of sports betting content for NOLA.com. We work with them. Great people. Great people.
Now you did it.
But here they are.
Traitor.
I think I hear kids. I think I hear kids in the background. Now, I can't tell. I think that's an Adirondack chair. It may as well be a tombstone behind it. But okay, so they burned a Saquon jersey, and the tweet reads, quote, my friends are all Giants fans, and to close out the summer, they burned a Saquon Barkley jersey. Sadly for them, this will probably be the high point of their 2024 NFL season. That's pretty spot on. Pretty spot on. Now, if you have a Giants fan in your life, make sure you check in on them. Make sure that you let them know that they're loved and they're cared about. The Giants are going to have a really bad year. There's no doubt. All right, let's go over to the questions, comments, and concerns, and then we're going to touch on that really brief sort of Flyers point, and then we're going to fly on out of here, and then we'll get ready for tomorrow's show and some other stuff this week. Joey B asks, was that Ford asking Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones, for $1 million? Danny, I need $1 million. I need $1 million. Reed DeFord says that Packers fans were going after Sweat, that it would be front page news if it was Eagles fans doing it. I know that there was the thing about Jalen Carter put out the DMs that he was getting on Instagram after the injury to Love. People calling him a dirty player. There were racial slurs. There were all kinds of things that were going his way. And he said, I wish him the best in his recovery. He was just trying to make a football play. I think we're good there. And Joey, I want to thank you for checking in to Crossing Broad as therapy. That's great. Very happy. Let's go back to the other thing, Craig, really quick. I had it on the Snow The Goalie account. We're going to talk about this very briefly because it's a mostly Eagles show. But we'll get into this on Tuesday's episode of the Russ Joy Show. Carter Hart apparently wants to get back into these United States of America. For those of you who weren't keeping up with what's been happening and what allegedly happened, Carter Hart had to turn himself into London, Ontario police during the Flyers season, effectively ending his NHL career, at least temporarily, certainly ending his career as a Flyer. I cannot envision a scenario where they bring him back, even if he's cleared. Was not extended a qualifying offer. He and the other players, the other 4 players who were also told to turn themselves in, they had to move back to Canada, including, I think there was one player who's playing in Russia. There were 2 with the Devils. There was somebody else, and then there was Hart. They all had to go back to Canada. And there was a question of, hey, are these guys even going to be allowed back in the U.S.? Like, even if they somehow managed to convince a team to give them a shot to play, which wasn't going to happen because it's a radioactive situation, like, could they come back to the U.S.? So, Craig, let's pull this up really quick. So, Carter Hart was quoted. Now, this ran in the Globe and Mail, which was the outlet that had all of the real breaking news about the situation that Hart was allegedly involved in, right? Craig, pull up the actual quote. Click on the image there. So in this story, they say, Mr. Hart, a former Philadelphia Flyer, says he intends to move from his home province of Alberta, that's out there in Western Canada, to Tennessee to work out full-time with a fellow former professional hockey player. And then he's quoted, if I am required to attend the pretrial motions, whether in person or remotely, it would be impossible for me to maintain my daily training regimen. His affidavit says he also hired an immigration lawyer. I have been previously denied entry to the United States due to my criminal charge. The Crown did not oppose the applications. That included Hart's, and there were other ones listed in the story. When Justice Thomas granted the players permission not to attend the hearings, he said they all had legitimate grounds. I just want to circle back to this really quick. So Carter Hart, accused, charged with a very heinous crime. Horrific. I'm not going to talk about it here. You can look it up. It's very bad. Very, very bad. He and these other players are trying to clear their names. Fair. They want to have a job. Fair. Why does he have to come back to the U.S.? Like, why does he need to go to Tennessee to train? So, like, one of the complaints is that if he has to attend the trial, like any kind of pre-trial hearings, it's going to mess with his regimen. It's going to mess with his ability to train. Fuck off. Like, seriously? That's the takeaway. After the accusations that have been levied against him, and after the fact that, like, we know this trial isn't supposed to happen until, like, if it goes to trial, it won't happen until early 2025 at the earliest. And that it's very unlikely that NHL teams are going to jump at the opportunity to sign him as soon as he's cleared, if that were to happen. All of those things in mind, why is that the decision? There had been, like, kind of jokes and, like, kind of rumors out there about, like, could Carter Hart end up in the KHL? Could the guys from the Devils end up in the KHL? Could they somehow get permission to leave? And the thought was like, no, Canadian officials probably would not let them leave to go to Russia. Now this question comes up about, like, will he be able to get into the U.S.? And he said he hasn't been allowed back in, wasn't allowed to go back in because of the criminal charges. I'm sorry, totally all about, like, if we're going to have, like, the, you know, innocent until proven guilty, all the, it's all fair. It's all fair. Oh, it's the Canadian system. I don't know if they do innocent before guilty. Well, it works. I believe in England, right? It's like you're guilty, but it is your burden to make sure that you prove you're not guilty of that which has been levied against you. I don't know how it works. Is there, like, you know, Canada, England, the whole thing? They didn't, like, totally declare their independence in the same way, you know, kind of still wear the wigs and everything in the trials. Yeah. Anyway. Oh, Craig, did you find this information? I love this. Go ahead. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 11D, guarantees Canadians the right to be presumed innocent. Specifically, anyone detained or charged with an offense has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty according to law in a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal. Thank you, Craig. So innocent until proven guilty does exist in the Canadian court system. Anyway, I totally get it. On a neutral observer ground, totally get it. There is nothing that says you have to play hockey right now.
if you can't convince a team anywhere in Canada to sign you, and certainly none of the American hockey teams are going to sign you, sorry, buddy, like get ready to learn Chinese. Sorry, buddy, get ready to like work with your hands. Go work construction for a few months until the trial happens. I don't know what to tell you, but you're going to have a really hard time getting even American hockey fans, even the people who initially rushed out to say,
oh, but he's always seemed like such a nice boy. He's always just seemed so innocent and so kind. And, I saw some pictures of him on Twitter before and on Instagram, and I think he was holding a puppy. He just seemed like a lovely boy.
All those people, maybe there are a few psychos out there who are like,
oh, well, we're just going to wait and see how this one plays out. We're just going to see how it plays out.
But a lot of people, you're going to have a hard time getting anybody to feel bad for this guy or any of these other guys, given the charges levied against him. Again, they might be proven to be false claims. They may get cleared. This might go to settlement. This might not go to trial. It might go to trial. Who knows? But the big thing that we all have to keep in mind is that just because you've been good enough to get to the NHL, just because you've been able to be a professional hockey player, does not mean that it is your right to get to circumvent rules that would have been put in place for other people. I have a hard time believing somebody who does masonry work in Canada and could maybe get a contract to do a job in the US is going to get an immigration attorney and be allowed across the border to go do that job. Using your platform, using your profile as a national hockey player should not allow you to game the system. And again, why the fuck does he want to go to Tennessee to go work out with a hockey player? Are there no rinks or professional players to play with in Canada? And on that, it's time to end Crossing Broadcast. I want to thank everybody who checked in. I will tell you there will be some more hockey talk on Tuesday's episode of the Russ Joy Show because we have to talk about this. We'll do a little bit more of a dive into the Carter Hart stuff. We'll do a bit of a dive into the Alexei Kolosov stuff. A lot of rumors swirling right now that his contract might be told, like what happened with Fedotov when he was sent off to military service. We'll get into that. We will talk about the Eagles game a little bit more, and then we'll start to turn the page a bit to this weekend's game. So we're going to do a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff on the Russ Joy Show on Tuesday, 8:30 a.m. You can find it live every Tuesday and Friday morning at 8:30 a.m. on the Russ Joy channel on YouTube. And you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. So I hope you'll join me there. I hope you join all the people who've joined here in the comments, many of whom find their way to that show live as well. I want to thank Craig on the other side of the glass. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you, including all those wonderful people on Instagram Live who watched, checked in, maybe even left comments that we couldn't pull up on the screen, but still sent them over. And there was one that I missed towards the end, but somebody said fly Eagles fly, and they sent like 6 different emojis. And I want to shout that person out, even though I can't find their name right now. So for Craig, I've been Russ Joy. I will continue to be Russ Joy, and I will see you tomorrow morning on the Russ Joy Show. Crossing Broadcast back on Thursday. Kevin Kincaid in a lead chair. Who will he get? Who will be the big guest coming off of a week 1 win? You'll have to tune in to find out. Thanks for watching. Talk to all of you tomorrow and/or Thursday.